Hey guys, and welcome to another Sonically Sound video. Today, we're going to look at how to mix drums, specifically floor toms. This is my simple way of how to mix drums, my go-to mix if you will. This isn't me saying this is the only way to mix drums, this is just how I would mix drums, and hopefully this will help you mix drums in the future. In this video, I'll be using Logic Pro 10 version 10.4.4. So if something doesn't look right to you at your setup at home, you might need to update. Now we looked at the rack tom before, and now we're going to look at the floor tom. You'll notice that I've got two floor toms, so we're going to look at the first one and then the second one. Basically one will be lower than the other. So the first thing I want to do is find where the floor tom is actually being played. Now the floor tom isn't played as frequently as maybe the snare or kick or hi-hat, but it will be played a little bit, so we want a small loop. So where that is looks quite good to loop. So we'll loop that and see what that sounds like. Okay, so we found that bit. I've soloed it, so that's all we're hearing. And the first thing I'll do is compress it. If you haven't watched my video on compressing, I recommend you do that so that this makes sense. If you have watched my video, you know I like to select Studio FET and then Graph. But remember to listen to all of them and figure out which one you prefer the sound of. Now when it comes to drums, we want quite a harsh compression, particularly when it's a rock style like this song is. So I'm probably going to select it to around 4.5, maybe something like that. So let's play it and see how that looks on the compressor. That looks quite good. I might ease it up a little bit, but it sounds quite good. It's really punching it through. So that sounds quite good. The next thing I like to do is EQ. Again, I have a video on EQ if you want to watch that before watching this. So in that floor tom, we want the low end, we want the boom, we want the sound of the stick hitting the skin, which we do on all the drums, and maybe remove some rings, but it doesn't sound like there are any, so we probably don't need to worry about that. So that sounds good to me. It's quite a basic way of EQing it. You could really go into it and really boost and cut it, but if you've done a good recording, you shouldn't need to do a complicated EQ. So I've boosted that low end that's really cutting through. I've removed a bit of that drone, which I sometimes tend to do, and I found the snap of the skin, which just kind of allows the drum to really come through. So once that's done, I'll take one more step for toms. You'll notice that when it's playing, it's really droning on once it's been hit. This is good. We quite like the sound to drone on, but maybe not too long. So what I like to do is use a noise gate. So you go into Dynamics, select Noise Gate. If you haven't watched my video on noise gates, then I recommend you do that. So basically what we want to do is we want to bring the threshold all the way up so no sound's coming through, and slowly bring it in until we feel like the gate is being opened enough and closing in time that it cuts off the drone. So that's capturing the sound for sure. It's cutting it up quite harshly. So this is when we look to the hold or the release. This allows the gate to be held open slightly longer after the signal has gone below the threshold. I'm going to put it on 200 milliseconds because that's what we did with the high tom and that sounded quite good. So that sounds a lot better. That's got a bit of a drone, but it's cutting off. You might be worried that the cutoff is too harsh, but it's going to be blended in with the rest of the drum sound and the rest of the band sound, so it'll probably blend in. If you are really worried about it, then use the release, but what I find is that just ends up completely opening the drone like we had it before, so I've just decided to kind of make the release a bit longer, but not too much longer. So once that's done, we then look to panning, as you know, and think about the orientation. So there are two types of orientation. There is drummer perspective and audience perspective. If you want the panning to be an audience perspective, the toms tend to be on the left side. So they're quite far on the left side. So you probably want it to kind of be like that. So sort of right angle, -40, something like that. I wouldn't do it all the way, but you can if you wish. But that's kind of how I'd want to do it. And if you want it to be drummer perspective, then it's reverse. So it's +40. The final thing to do is reverb. Now, if you haven't watched my video on reverb, I suggest you do that now, as this might not make sense. So I'll send the signal to an aux, which already has a Space Designer reverb set up along with an EQ from when I mixed the hi-hat and the rack tom and the snare. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to it and see how much of it we want to bring in and see if it's too much or too little. So that sounds quite good to me. It's quite a low sound, so like the kick, we don't put any reverb on it, so we probably won't hear a great deal of it, but we might hear a bit of the snap, which is nice to hear. So once I've mixed the floor tom, then you'll see I have a second floor tom. So when I play that on its own, that definitely sounds lower. So it's definitely playing a different sound, but it's going to be relatively similar. In scenarios like this, where you've got a very similar sound, like two floor toms or overheads or something like that, you can go settings, copy channel strip setting. And when you go to floor 2, you can put paste channel strip setting. What this has done is copied everything I did in the floor tom over to the second. Now don't just leave it like that, because if you remember, the floor tom did sound very different to the other floor tom. So we want to go through again and just check that everything's fine. The compression should be very similar, but it might be louder. The mic might be closer, or they might be hitting that one particularly harder. So you see there, it's not really being compressed that much, so I might want to bring the threshold down so it is. So that sounds much better. Again, we're going to go into the EQ and just see if we want it to be any different. We probably will, as the EQ was for a higher tom. It's still a floor tom, so still low, but it's higher in frequency, whereas that was much lower. So we're probably going to end up moving this to be a lot lower. So you can see there I basically moved everything a bit lower down because it's a lower tom, so it is going to be producing lower frequencies. So that sounds good. And then finally the noise, we just want to make sure that it is turning off at the right time, it is holding it for as long as we want, and it's not coming in too early. Now, because this floor tom's so close to the other floor tom, it's picking up that roll from the second floor tom to this one. If I had it higher, as I did before, you kind of hear it snapping in and out, and it's probably best to just leave it at 21. It's not picking up too much. It's cutting off at a good time. I'm quite happy with it being there. And then we go to Panning, now the floor tom we had at -40, and this will be very similar as it will be next to each other. So you might want the first floor tom to maybe be more at like 35 and then this one to be at 40, or have this one move so it's more like 45 or 50. I'll have it at 45 as I think they're quite close to each other. Also they're lower frequency, so it might not be super clear that they're all the way over there. And then finally reverb. So what we're going to do is bring this bus back down to 0 and then slowly bring it in again and see how that sounds. Now that sounds quite good. I've got it quite high because I quite like that low bit really coming through. So that sounds quite good. So the final thing that needs doing then is mixing the floor toms together. So I'm going to solo both of these and we're going to hear them individually and then hear them together. So I'll probably start with this floor tom on full and this one on 0 and slowly bring it in and see how that sounds. Now this is slightly different to when I mix the kick in or snare because it's not the same instrument. So bringing it slowly in does work and it is helpful, but they're playing at different times, so you can't expect it to sound very different, but you just want to hear what do you want to hear more of, what do you want to hear less of, but they're quite good and strong at 0, but I might bring them both down a bit because you can see that they are peaking. And I might bring that low one down a bit more, but I might want to bring it up if I want that real boom. Because it sounds quite nice where it rolls off that tom and then onto the floor tom and then onto that final floor tom, and it really comes through as the final accent to that drum rhythm. So I quite like the second floor tom being louder. It's still peaking, so I'll bring both of them down a bit. So I've got them mixed pretty much at the same level because they are two different instruments, so they're playing different things. But that sounds quite good to me. So the floor toms are mixed together, and then we won't mix the rack tom together at this point because it's very much a separate instrument in a separate range, whereas these floor toms are very close together, so you kind of want to mix those together. Once you've done all that, you've compressed, EQ'd, noise gated, panned and reverbed both of them, then that's all you have to do. So yeah, that's how you mix floor toms. I hope you liked this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and if there's a video I haven't covered or you'd like me to, put it in the comments below and I'll see if I get to it. I'm Sonically Sound, and until next time, have fun mixing.